Welcome to Inviting Oneness, a podcast where we explore true personal stories from friends and members of EquaSion. Stories where the illusion of separateness gave way to the deeper truth of our shared humanity. Oneness isn't an idea, it's an experience. And today we continue listening for it, one story at a time. Today's episode is with Jake Campbell. Jake is currently leading Culture and Belonging at St. Elizabeth Healthcare. He holds an MBA and Master's in Education and is presently pursuing a PhD in Educational Psychology, investigating the impact of intersecting identities and profiling for high-ability learners. Jake has developed and facilitated approved inclusive leadership continuing education experiences for varying audiences, including leaders of Fortune 500 companies, nonprofits, law enforcement, hospital administration, law firms, and university administration. Originally from Sydney, Australia, via Tallahassee and Baltimore, his passions outside of work are martial arts, rugby league, and cooking, especially matzah ball soup. He lives with his wife Morgan, who he married in March of 2025. Here's Jake.
My moment in my story actually begins with my grandmother and my mother. And my grandfather. My grandfather and grandmother were Holocaust survivors. And what is often thought is that the Holocaust in Poland ended in 1945, right? But really, the murders didn't end, the assaults didn't end. And I would argue that the Holocaust very much continued for many years afterwards in Poland. And my mother would tell me stories about how she was growing up, including one intense one that she reminded me of when I was planning on getting engaged, because we were using the ring that my grandfather used to propose to my grandmother after the Holocaust. And she's telling me about, because the ring brought up memories about how when she was 10 years old, some children in her school essentially abducted her, kidnapped her, brought her into another room, and branded her with burning hot light bulbs. And that this was not an uncommon thing to happen, that similar things happened to others of her friends, others of her family friends. And my grandfather decided to make the decision to bring the family to Australia, and they escaped from Poland to Czechoslovakia, Czechoslovakia to Austria, Austria to Italy, Italy to Dover, England. And my older brother's name is called Dover because that was when my mother first felt safe. And then from Dover to Melbourne, Australia. And during that trip, my mother went from having 6 siblings to 3 siblings, with the others perishing, either during the escape or during the trip. Now, what happened from there was my mother, while escaping some of the most brutal forms of discrimination, still very much grew up with discrimination, starting off with slurs that aren't really slurs anymore. So I feel comfortable saying those words. And even if some people still consider them slurs, they're words that don't mean anything in America. They more mean things in Australia. So growing up, she would be called continental or like continentals in Australia. And that slowly changed into being called wogs, which is now a term of endearment in Australia, especially for people from the Mediterranean. But I remember this became very, very stark to me when I was a child. And I remember my mother backing into a parking spot that another man in the parking lot felt was his parking spot, and him shouting at her relentlessly and calling her an effing wog. And many more of those experiences, including in healthcare, including in welfare, including at school from my teachers, I would see, never directed at me, because my mother very much wanted me to assimilate, but very often directed at her because she couldn't hide her accent, and it was much harder for her to hide her culture. And what I knew I wanted to do was, all my life, as a result of that, was something that had something to do with discrimination. And because my mother wanted me to assimilate, she very much also hid, not necessarily hid, but didn't put me in opportunities where I could practice Judaism and didn't give me opportunities to teach me about our Jewish culture and our Jewish heritage. And so when I came to university, when I was studying teaching, and I loved teaching, but the thing that really energized me was my volunteer work, where I got to learn and build community for other Jewish students. And so when I became a teacher and then later an educational consultant, that work was never as energizing as the volunteer working that I was doing tangential to that, building a Jewish community. And what I learned soon, that what I really loved about that work was that I was able to have people feel like they belonged, that it was about building belonging, that it wasn't about people feeling as though they had to mold and shape themselves to fit in with another group. It was about how people could show every part of who they are so that they could thrive as who they truly are. Now, I'm no longer working in the Jewish community. I'm now working for a Catholic hospital where I get to still talk about people's cultures. And I find that even more energizing than what I did with my Jewish communal work, because now it's a lot more universal. And get to talk about what people find important about themselves, what people value about themselves, and help people value that in each other so that they can belong. And even more so in something so paramount as in healthcare. And what we really focus on here at St. Elizabeth is the Catholic social teaching of cura personalis, which is the idea of care for the whole person. And it doesn't matter what religion people come from, what their background is, what their culture is. It doesn't matter whether they're a colleague, a patient, a family member, a community member. The idea is that we want to care for them, mind, body, and spirit, all of who they are. And so when we're talking about oneness, the moment of oneness, what I find when I look at philosophers, especially religious philosophers that talk about this, is that it's almost always something around the lines of find what you can do best, what you feel as though you were made to do. And when that meets what you want to do, and that also meets what God wants you to do, well, then there's a certain level of oneness. So that's almost like the meaning of life. In Judaism, we call that Vayikra, God's call. I'm very fortunate to be living that at the moment.
Yeah, I love that, Jake. Thanks so much, man. There's a lot here that I wrote down that strikes me. The word belonging is a word that I am driven by, I'm called by, and also is a word that I think is a politically negative word right now,
Mhm.
right? There's a lot of ways to conceive of and define belonging. I wonder, do you have a particular way that you think of what it means to belong? How do you define belonging?
Yeah, and I said it a little bit in the conversation, but I think of it almost as what it's not, right? You can say, right, oh, I really fit in here. But that's not belonging, because what that sounds like to me is like you've got a square and you're trying to fit that into a circle hole. So you cut around the edges, you put it on a descanter, and then the circle fits in. But it never really belongs there. And so when I think of belonging, I think about how it's almost like a perfect fit, right? You can be exactly who you are in that place. You don't have to hide any of who you are. You can show all of who you are at every moment. I would say that's belonging.
That resonates with me. The obvious kind of follow-up question here is you're working for a Catholic institution, you're a Jewish guy. To what extent are you able to feel belonging in the work that you're doing?
I feel like because I work for a Catholic institution, I feel belonging. What I've been very fortunate, especially working right in the department that's most connected with our mission services. I've been very fortunate to have learned a lot about the Catholic social teachings. And we already talked about cura personalis, care for the whole person. And so because of that, right, I know that I'm valued for my Jewish identity. Pursuit of the common good, that it's about how can we make the world better for every single person that is in our community. And that includes myself upholding human dignity, because and every religion, almost, especially Abrahamic religions, have this, right, that we're built in the image of God. And so we should respect and uphold people's dignity in the same sort of vein. And as a result of that as well, we are very much trying to focus on people not just feeling as though, again, that they are tolerated for having different religious identities and a Catholic religious identity. Not even that they feel as though they can practice freely, but that they are valued because of their diverse identity. So to answer the question, in one line, yes, because it's a Catholic institution, I feel as though I belong as a Jewish associate.
Yeah, and I hear a little bit of what you're saying there as you are valued and able to meaningfully contribute to the community that you're a part of at St. Elizabeth. And I think that connects very closely to John Powell's understanding of belonging, where he says belonging means that you're a valuable contributor of the society that you're a part of. So that resonates deeply with me. The other thing that really struck me as you were talking was the name of your brother and that place, Dover, being the place where your mom first felt like she was safe. What does safety have to do with belonging for you?
It's such a cool question. For me, safety is very much, well, if we think of Maslow's hierarchy, and it's interesting that in Maslow's paper where he talks about the hierarchy, he talks about what actualization is. And he says that, well, a writer must write, a mathematician must do mathematics, a dancer must dance, something along those lines around professions, and that's what they must do. And then he says, and of course it was written in the 40s, so he says, whatever a man, I think we can say whatever a person, if a person doesn't do what they must do, they will be unhappy for the rest of their days. And we know that at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy is the physiological needs, and then the safety needs, and following from that are belonging needs. That you cannot feel belonging, and that an extension of belonging, right, is then being who you were meant to be, is doing that stuff that we were talking about before, right? Where your work, you feel like a valued contributing member of society, but you're also doing what you're meant to do. You can't do that unless you feel like you belong. And you can't feel like you belong if you feel unsafe in any kind of way. We can look at schools with bullying. Do you think a child who feels unsafe because they're being bullied, whether they're being bullied by educators or bullied by their class peers or anybody else, feels as though they belong in that school community? Absolutely not. Safety is a prerequisite to belonging, and actualization is an extension then of belonging.
Actualization is where I was going next. And for the final question, I think one of the gifts of Judaism is this focus on the call, right?
Mhm.
We hear this again and again and again in the prophets and Moses and this articulation of the call. And being around you, one of the things that I've always found inspiring is you have this clarity of call and purpose in the work that you're doing.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, so I wonder, like for folks who are struggling a little bit with that, maybe they don't quite know if they are a dancer or a painter or whatever it is. If they're trying to discern what their call is, especially in this moment when things feel really fraught and difficult, what kind of word of encouragement would you have for them?
That at first I would remind them of the Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, when he speaks about the meaning of life. He said that if you keep searching for the meaning of life, there won't be enough of life left to live it. But on the flip side, right, another Rebbe, and his name escapes me, he also would begin every single day with saying that today is a good day to have a good day. And so I would say if you haven't found it, don't worry because you'll know it when you find it, because the idea, right, is that you will belong, you will love what it is you're doing, you'll find that it is valuable, that it is meaningful, and you will feel that it's meaningful. And that every day is an opportunity to have a good day. And if you have enough of those good days in a row, then I would say that you are answering God's call.
Thanks for joining us on Inviting Oneness, where we share real stories of connection that dissolve the illusion of separation and reveal our common humanity. If this episode moved you and you'd like to get involved, visit us at EquaSion.org. Until next time, may we keep inviting oneness within ourselves and with one another.